Before we begin with part 1, let us recall the full title of today's story. The Mafia Boss saw the Black Maid cover a stray dog with her scarf and stopped moving entirely. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to Naomi Brooks. The evening air hung cold over the Castellano estate, the kind that sinks through coats and settles in the bones. Naomi Brooks stepped out the back service door, clutching the trash bag scheduled for the late-hour run, her breath curling into the dim glow of the porch light. She had only been working here 6 days, long enough to learn that the property's eastern courtyard was strictly off-limits after dark. But tonight, something soft and broken in the wind pulled her attention toward it. A faint whimper. Barely there. Fragile. Naomi froze, listening. Another whimper drifted through the narrow stretch of hedges, and without thinking, she followed it, her sneakers brushing across the gravel, her heart pressing upward with worry instead of fear. Behind the trimmed boxwoods, she found the source, a small stray dog, thin as wire, its soaked fur clinging to its shivering frame. Its ribs showed with every trembling breath. Naomi dropped to her knees instantly. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft enough not to startle it. "It's okay. I'm right here." She slipped off her scarf, deep red, frayed at the edges, the only thing she owned that still carried her late mother's scent. She wrapped it gently around the dog's body, lifting the ends to shield it from the biting wind. The scarf absorbed the rainwater quickly, darkening as the dog leaned against her hand, seeking warmth. Naomi curved her body protectively around it, ignoring the cold creeping beneath her thin uniform. In that moment, she wasn't a maid, or an employee warned never to meddle. She was simply someone who saw a creature in need and couldn't turn away. She didn't hear the footsteps at first, silent, measured, confident. Not until the air shifted. Behind her, carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne and winter smoke. She turned and froze. Lorenzo Castellano stood a few feet away, the porch light carving his tall frame into sharp edges, broad shoulders, tailored coat, expression unreadable. His steps stopped mid-stride, completely, as if the world itself had paused with him. The man known across the city for his icy resolve, for decisions that shaped the fate of entire blocks, didn't speak, didn't move. His eyes, dark, steady, fell on the side of her hands cupping the trembling dog wrapped in her fading red scarf. For a long breath, Naomi didn't know if she should stand, apologize, or disappear. But in his stillness, there was no anger. Only something else. Something quiet. Something she didn't yet understand. The night around them held its breath. Naomi felt the weight of Lorenzo Castellano's gaze long before she dared to look up again. The rain softened to a mist around them, settling on the gravel like a thin veil, as if the world was trying not to disturb whatever moment had taken shape in the courtyard. The small dog shifted under her scarf, nuzzling closer, its trembling easing just slightly. Naomi whispered a quiet reassurance, her fingers brushing its damp fur. She wanted to stand, to explain, to apologize for being someplace she had been told never to enter, but her knees refused to move. Something about the stillness behind her held her in place. Lorenzo finally took one slow step forward, not with the sharp authority that usually carried him, but with a kind of cautious curiosity, as if he feared breaking the moment. His breath came out in a visible cloud in the cold air. "It was alone?" he asked, his voice quiet, lower than she had ever heard it. Naomi nodded. "I think it was trying to hide from the wind." She looked down, unable to guess what expression he wore. She had never spoken this many words to him. She had barely spoken at all since moving into the staff quarters. Yet now her voice found steadiness where she did not expect it. "It was freezing. I could not just walk past it." Lorenzo's gaze drifted to the scarf, the deep red cloth darkened with moisture. For a fleeting second, Naomi saw something shift in his eyes, something that softened the strong lines of his face. "You gave it your scarf," he said, not as a question, but as a thought he was trying to understand. "It needed it more than I did," she replied. The simplicity of the statement seemed to land somewhere deep within him. He exhaled again, slowly, as if the cold air carried an old memory with it. Naomi could not tell what he was thinking, but she felt the tension in the space around them change. It did not feel dangerous. It felt unexpectedly human. The small dog whimpered again, prompting Naomi to gently adjust the scarf so it wrapped more securely around its body. Her fingers shook slightly from the cold, and without meaning to, she let out a shiver. Lorenzo noticed. His shoulders tightened just enough to show it. He glanced toward the lit windows of the estate, then toward the path leading to the staff door. "You should not be out here without a coat," he said, his tone soft but firm. "It is below 50 degrees tonight." Naomi blinked, surprised by his concern. She almost laughed under her breath, but held it in. "It is fine, sir. I am used to the cold." "That does not mean you should endure it," he replied. The words seemed to slip out before he could stop them. She did not know what to say. The silence that followed was not heavy like before. It was quieter, warmer, as if the cold air had loosened just a little around them. Lorenzo crouched slowly, careful not to startle the dog. The porch light caught in the sheen of rain on his coat, outlining the moment as if it were not meant to be rushed. "Will it let me see?" he asked. Naomi hesitated, then nodded. She adjusted her position slightly, so he could see the small face peeking from within the scarf. The dog blinked up at him weakly. Lorenzo studied it for a long moment, his expression unreadable but no longer distant. "It is smaller than I thought," he murmured. Naomi smiled softly. "It just needs warmth. Anyone would be scared out here alone." Lorenzo looked at her then, truly looked, as if seeing her for the first time beyond the uniform and the rules and the distance that separated their worlds. "Not everyone would have stopped," he said quietly, and for the first time since she arrived at the estate, Naomi felt seen. The cold air lingered around them as the small dog settled deeper into Naomi's scarf, its breathing steadier now, its tiny frame warming beneath the soft fabric. Lorenzo remained crouched beside her, his eyes tracing every small movement she made, as if trying to understand the parts of her that did not fit into the world he controlled so effortlessly. Naomi kept her hands cupped around the dog, shielding it from the remaining wind drifting through the courtyard. She could feel Lorenzo's presence beside her, steady and unexpectedly calm, like a quiet turning point she had not seen coming. She glanced toward the estate's windows, glowing faintly with golden light. Somewhere inside, the staff was likely finishing their nightly routines, unaware that the most private corner of the property now held a moment that felt strangely sacred. "It will need warmth soon," Naomi said softly, adjusting the scarf again. "Its body temperature feels low." Lorenzo nodded. "We have heaters in the garden house," he said. "It is closer than the main building." Naomi blinked. She had heard of the garden house. Only family used it, and occasionally business guests she was told to avoid. "Sir, I can take it around back," she said quickly. "I do not want to intrude where I should not be." "It is not an intrusion," Lorenzo replied, his tone quiet but certain. "Right now, the only thing that matters is that it feels safe." The simple clarity in his voice made her chest tighten. It was the same tone people used when they remembered something important, something personal. Naomi stood slowly, careful not to jostle the dog. Her uniform clung to her from the damp air, but she ignored the chill. Lorenzo rose too, brushing a bit of moisture from his sleeve. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to offer help or keep his distance. It was unusual, seeing him hesitant. Finally, he extended a hand, not to take the dog, but to steady Naomi as she stepped over the slick gravel. She hesitated only a second before she placed her free hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, grounding. Something softened briefly in his expression, the lines of his face easing as he guided her toward the path. Naomi murmured, "Thank you, sir. You protected something small," he said. "The least I can do is make sure you do not slip." They walked slowly toward the garden house, the courtyard lamps casting long shadows behind them. The dog stirred under the scarf, letting out a small sigh that made Naomi smile. Lorenzo noticed it. "It trusts you already," he said. "Animals sense intention. Or maybe it just needed someone to stop," Naomi replied. "Sometimes that is all it takes." Her words lingered in the cool air. Lorenzo did not answer immediately, but his gaze lowered in a way that told her the thought had struck somewhere deep. When they reached the garden house steps, Naomi paused, unsure if she should enter first or wait for permission. Lorenzo opened the door for her, warm air spilling into the night. "After you," he said. Inside, soft light and gentle heat wrapped around them. Naomi set the dog on a small cushioned bench and began unwrapping the scarf. Lorenzo watched her careful movements with a strange mix of focus and quiet awe, as if witnessing a language he had forgotten how to speak. In that warm room, far from the cold courtyard and the rules she had memorized since arriving, Naomi felt something shift. Not in the dog, not even in the room around them, but in him. She did not know what it meant, but she could feel it, as clearly as the heat brushing her skin. Warmth from the garden house heater slowly filled the quiet room, softening the edges of the moment as Naomi adjusted the small dog on the cushioned bench. Its fur was still damp but no longer icy, and its breathing had grown steadier, each rise and fall a tiny sign of trust. Lorenzo stood a few steps behind her, his hands loosely at his sides, his posture relaxed in a way that looked almost unfamiliar on him. He watched Naomi with an expression that carried no urgency, no expectation, just a curious stillness, as though he was witnessing something he had not felt in a long time. Naomi brushed a bit of water from the dog's forehead, gently smoothing its fur. "It must have been out there for hours," she murmured. "Maybe longer." Lorenzo moved closer, his steps quiet on the polished floor. "Most creatures do not last long in the cold out here," he said. "The wind off the lake can be harsh." Naomi nodded. It looked like it had been looking for a place to hide. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. Her hand lingered on the scarf, now draped loosely over the dog like a blanket. Lorenzo's gaze followed the movement, his eyes drifting once more toward the deep red fabric. He seemed to be studying it, not just as an object, but as a question he had not yet asked. "That scarf," he said, his voice low. "It matters to you." Naomi hesitated. Her fingers paused on the edge of the cloth. "It was my mother's," she admitted. "She made it for me when I was a teenager. I have had it for years." Lorenzo considered this, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "And you gave it away without thinking." Naomi shook her head gently. "I did think," she said. "I thought about how cold it must have felt. I thought about how the scarf would help more wrapped around it than around me." Lorenzo's eyes lifted to her face, steady and searching. Most people would not have made that choice. Naomi offered a small smile, the kind that came from humility rather than confidence. Maybe they would if they stopped long enough to see it. Sometimes the smallest things cannot speak for themselves. The silence that followed held something delicate, something almost fragile. The heater hummed softly in the background, warming the room with a gentle breeze that brushed against Naomi's damp sleeves. Lorenzo looked around the garden house, as if seeing it anew. Once a private place for rare family gatherings, it had rarely been used since. Tonight, somehow, it felt different. He reached for a folded throw blanket on a nearby chair and handed it to her without a word. Naomi accepted it, draping it gently over the dog. Her fingertips brushed his hand for a brief second. It was an accident, but the contact lingered in the air between them, a moment neither of them tried to acknowledge nor pull away from too quickly. Lorenzo cleared his throat softly, his voice quieter when he spoke again. "You handled all of this with calm," he said. "Not many people stay steady when faced with something unexpected." Naomi shook her head. "It is not bravery," she said. "It is just choosing kindness when it shows up at your feet." Lorenzo looked at her, the warmth in his eyes no longer something he tried to hide. "That," he said, "is its own kind of bravery." Naomi felt her breath catch, not from surprise, but from the honesty in his tone. She turned her attention back to the small dog, running her hand gently along its back. The room's quiet wrapped around them again, softer this time, carrying the weight of a moment that felt like the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The small dog rested beneath the blanket with its eyes half closed, its breathing steady now, as if the warmth of the garden house had finally convinced it that the night was no longer something to fear. Naomi kept one hand lightly on its back, feeling the tiny rises and falls that signaled it was slipping toward sleep. The quiet inside the room felt different than the quiet outside. It felt deliberate, almost gentle, a stillness that invited honesty rather than demanded silence. Lorenzo stood nearby, his posture composed yet softened, as though the weight he usually carried on his shoulders had eased for just a moment. His gaze moved from the dog to Naomi, lingering without the sharpness she often saw when he addressed staff. "You should sit," he said quietly. You have been kneeling and standing for a long time. Naomi blinked, surprised by the suggestion, but she pulled a nearby stool closer and sat beside the bench. The warmth of the room seeped slowly into her chilled body, and she let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Lorenzo watched her a moment longer before taking a seat on the edge of a nearby chair, close enough to see the small dog clearly, but far enough to give her space. His voice lowered, thoughtful. Not many people know how to respond calmly when something unexpected appears in front of them. You handled everything with care. Naomi looked down at her hands. Her fingers were still slightly red from the cold, but they no longer shook. I just did what anyone would do, she said softly. There was no choice to make. It needed help. Lorenzo tilted his head slightly, studying her expression. You say that as if it is simple, but most people walk past what does not belong to them. His eyes drifted to the dog again. You did the opposite. Naomi felt warmth rise to her cheeks, though she did not know why. I did not think about rules, she admitted. I only thought about how cold it looked. The heater hummed softly, filling the room with a steady warmth. A few drops of melted snow fell from Naomi's sleeves onto the floor, evidence of how long she had been outside. Lorenzo noticed. He leaned back slightly, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more concerned. You should change into something dry soon, he said. You will get sick if you stay in wet clothes. Naomi nodded politely. I will, sir. After it settles completely. Lorenzo's eyes returned to her with a subtle, almost reluctant softness. You are very different from what I expected, he said. Naomi looked up, startled. Expected? Lorenzo hesitated, as if considering how much to reveal. People who work here usually try not to get involved in anything beyond their tasks. They keep their distance. They do not risk stepping into situations that might draw attention. Naomi lowered her gaze. I did not mean to draw attention, she said. I just wanted to help. And that, Lorenzo replied quietly, is exactly what drew my attention. Naomi felt the weight of his words settle gently around her, like the blanket she had placed over the dog. Something in his tone had shifted again, not warmer, but clearer, as if he was acknowledging a truth he had tried to ignore. She looked down at the small dog, its tiny frame rising and falling rhythmically beneath the red scarf and the throw blanket. The sight made her smile faintly. It is going to be okay, she whispered. It just needed a chance to rest. Lorenzo's voice lowered to a murmur. Sometimes that is all any of us need. Naomi lifted her eyes toward him. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, something quiet and human, born not from rules or expectations, but from the simple act of stopping long enough to see another living being. The room held still again, the warmth pressing softly around them as if waiting for whatever would come next. The small dog shifted beneath the blankets, letting out a soft, contented sigh that drifted through the warm air of the garden house. Naomi watched it with gentle focus, her hand resting lightly against its side, as if anchoring the fragile peace that had settled over the room. Lorenzo stood a little farther back now, leaning against a wooden counter, his arms loosely crossed, though nothing about his posture suggested authority. Instead, there was a sense of quiet observation, as if he was allowing the moment to unfold without interference. A faint mist still clung to the edges of his coat, catching the warm light and softening the powerful lines of his presence. Naomi finally looked up at him, her expression hesitant. Sir, she said, her voice low. Thank you for letting me bring it in here. I know I stepped out of bounds earlier. Lorenzo shook his head slowly. There are moments when rules do not matter, he replied. Tonight was one of them. Naomi lowered her gaze again, brushing her fingers gently along the dog's paw. I just could not walk away, she said. Not when it was suffering like that. I know, Lorenzo answered, his tone quiet but firm. That is what surprised me. She paused, waiting. His eyes softened. Most people in my world do not stop for what is small or inconvenient. They step over it. You did the opposite. Naomi felt warmth move through her chest at his words, though she did not fully understand why. Maybe they would stop, she said softly, if they realized someone should. Lorenzo exhaled, a breath that carried memory more than fatigue. My sister used to say something like that. Naomi turned to him, surprised by the mention. He rarely spoke about family. She cared for stray animals. Lorenzo continued, his gaze drifting to the dog. She used to wrap them in whatever she had. Coats, sweaters, blankets. Anything. He paused, and though his voice remained steady, there was a subtle ache beneath the surface. She always said the same thing you did, that the small ones have no one else. Naomi's expression softened. She sounds kind, she whispered. She was, Lorenzo replied. More than most. The room felt warmer than the heater could account for, filled with an unspoken understanding that neither of them tried to name. The small dog curled deeper into the red scarf, its body now limp with comfort. Naomi smiled at it, a quiet, relieved smile. It feels safe now, she said. Lorenzo watched her, his voice low. So do you? Naomi looked up, startled by the gentle weight of his words. Lorenzo seemed to realize how they sounded, but he did not take them back. Instead, he stepped closer, studying her face with a calm seriousness. You handled everything tonight with grace, he said. Most people panic. You did not. Naomi shook her head lightly. I just reacted. Exactly, he replied. You reacted with compassion. She felt her breath catch, not from flattery, but from the sincerity behind it. Lorenzo's eyes moved briefly to her damp sleeves. You should change out of those wet clothes soon, he said gently. Your body is probably freezing. Naomi nodded. I will. I just wanted to make sure it fell asleep first. The dog let out a tiny yawn as if confirming her intention. Lorenzo smiled softly, a rare and almost hidden expression. It trusts you, he said. That is not something that can be forced. Naomi ran her fingers along the scarf one more time. Animals understand hearts better than people do, she murmured. Sometimes, Lorenzo replied, his voice barely above a whisper. People understand them too. They just forget until something reminds them. Their eyes met in the quiet glow of the room, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. Outside, the winter wind brushed against the windows, but inside, warmth lingered, holding the night gently in place. The soft rhythm of the small dog's breathing filled the garden house, blending with the gentle hum of the heater as if the room itself had settled into a calm that neither Naomi nor Lorenzo wanted to disturb. The warmth wrapped around them, almost protective, making the world outside feel impossibly distant. Naomi brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek, noticing for the first time how the moisture from the rain had dried into faint waves at the ends. Her hands, though no longer trembling, still rested lightly near the dog, as if she needed to be sure it felt safe even in its sleep. Lorenzo shifted his weight slightly, the quiet movement drawing her attention. He stood near the window now, looking out at the dark courtyard where the wind nudged the hedges side to side. His silhouette was softened by the warm light, giving him an almost contemplative presence, far removed from the sharp authority she saw in the main house. It is strange, he said after a moment, his voice low, how something so small can change the course of an evening. Naomi smiled faintly. Most things worth noticing are small, she replied. People just overlook them because they are focused on everything else. Lorenzo turned toward her, studying her expression. You do not overlook much, do you? Naomi thought about that, then shook her head slightly. I think when you have lost a lot, you become careful not to miss what is still here. Her tone was soft, but the truth in it lingered between them, settling into the warm air like dust catching the light. Lorenzo considered her words with surprising gentleness. You speak like someone older than you are, he said. Experience does that, she answered quietly. Lorenzo stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. His eyes drifted to the small dog again. It chose to trust you, he said. I can see why. Naomi looked down, unsure what to do with the unexpected kindness in his tone. I think it just needed someone, she murmured. Anyone would have done the same. Lorenzo shook his head. No, not anyone. He paused, and something thoughtful crossed his features. Most people do not see what you saw. They do not act without being asked. That is rare. Naomi felt her breath hitch for a moment, her heartbeat tapping softly against her ribs. She had not expected praise, especially not from him. I did not mean to make things complicated, she said. I know I am new here. I did not want to overstep. You did not overstep, Lorenzo replied. You reminded this place that compassion still exists. That matters. Naomi blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. The heater clicked softly in the corner as it shifted temperatures, and for a moment, the only sound was the gentle sigh of the sleeping dog. Lorenzo's gaze lingered on Naomi's damp sleeves once more. You are freezing, he said. Please, go change into something warm. I will stay here with it. Naomi looked up quickly. You will? Yes, he said simply. It should not wake up alone. And you have done more than enough tonight. Naomi hesitated, her hand resting on the red scarf. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Their eyes held for a long, unbroken moment, as though the night refused to let the connection slip away just yet. Then Naomi rose slowly, reluctant but knowing he was right. As she stepped toward the door, she looked back once more. Lorenzo had moved to sit beside the small dog. His posture relaxed, his attention gentle in a way she had never thought possible. In the warm glow of the garden house, with her mother's scarf wrapped around a creature they had both saved, Naomi felt something shift inside her, a quiet understanding that this night had changed more than just the fate of a stray. Naomi stepped into the cool night air as she left the garden house. The warmth of the room dissolving behind her like a memory she was not quite ready to let go of. The path back to the staff quarters was dim, the small lanterns casting gentle pools of light across the gravel. Her clothes were still damp, but her mind felt unusually clear, held steady by the image of Lorenzo sitting beside the tiny sleeping dog. His expression softened in a way she never could have imagined hours earlier. As she walked, the wind tugged at her sleeves, and Naomi wrapped her arms around herself, not out of fear, but from the sensation of something new settling in her chest. When she reached the side entrance, she paused for a moment, glancing back toward the glowing shape of the garden house. It felt strange to leave him there, even though he had insisted. Inside, the estate was quiet, the kind of stillness that happens only when staff have finished their duties and the world decides to exhale at once. Naomi made her way through the hall, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing softly as she reached her small room. She closed the door gently behind her, peeled off her damp uniform, and changed into warm sweatpants and a thick sweater that hugged her skin with comforting heat. For a moment, she stood still, listening to the hum of the old radiator and feeling the warmth return to her fingers. But her thoughts were not here. They were back in the garden house, with a small dog wrapped in her mother's scarf, and a man who had surprised her in ways she could not define. Naomi sat on the edge of her bed, the quiet of the room almost too sharp after the softness of the evening. She inhaled deeply, trying to understand the shift she felt. She had worked in wealthy homes before. She had seen power, indifference, even cruelty. But she had never seen a man like Lorenzo Castellano pause for something small, something fragile, something that held no value except the simple fact of being alive. She brushed her fingers over her palm, remembering how his expression had changed when he talked about his sister. There had been grief there, yes, but also tenderness, an echo of a time when he had been someone else, someone happier. Naomi lay back on the bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. It was just a dog, she whispered to herself, though she knew it was not just that. It was the way he had stayed. It was the way he had looked at her when he said compassion mattered. It was the way the warmth of the garden house had held the two of them in a moment that felt suspended from the rest of their lives. Finally, after several minutes, Naomi rose again, unable to shake the feeling that she needed to check on the dog one more time. Not because she doubted Lorenzo was capable, but because something in her heart pulled her back toward that warm glow. She slipped out of her room, moving quietly down the hall and out into the night. The air was crisp, but it no longer bit at her skin. As the garden house came into view, she saw light still shining through the windows. She approached slowly, her steps soft, unsure whether she should knock or simply look in. But when she reached the doorway, she stopped. Through the glass, she saw Lorenzo still seated beside the tiny dog, his posture calm, his gaze steady, as though guarding something precious. He had not left. Naomi felt her breath catch. Something in the sight reached inside her, settling in a place she had not opened in a long time. And in the gentle hush of the night, she understood. This evening had shifted something in both of them, whether they were ready for it or not. Naomi remained at the doorway for a long moment, her hand resting lightly against the frame as she watched Lorenzo inside the warm glow of the garden house. The light cast a soft halo over him, illuminating the thoughtful stillness on his face as he sat beside the tiny dog that now slept without fear. Something about the quiet scene felt fragile, as though stepping inside too quickly might break whatever unspoken understanding had formed between them. Finally, gathering her breath, she pushed the door open gently. The soft creak was enough to draw Lorenzo's attention. He looked up, and the expression he wore was not surprise, nor irritation, but something closer to relief, as if he had been expecting her without realizing it. "You came back," he said, his voice warm and steady. Naomi stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. "I wanted to make sure everything was still all right," she replied. "And I wanted to thank you again." Lorenzo shook his head. "You do not owe me thanks, Naomi. If anything, I should thank you." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Lorenzo continued before she could speak. "Tonight reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said. His gaze drifted to the sleeping dog, then back to her. "That compassion, even from someone who owes you nothing, can change the air in a room." Naomi felt her heart tighten in her chest. "I only did what anyone should do." "Maybe," he said, "but you did it without hesitation. That matters more than you realize." The heater hummed softly, and the warm air brushed gently across Naomi's sweater as she stepped closer to the small dog. She knelt beside it, adjusting the scarf just a little to make sure it stayed wrapped securely. Her mother's scarf looked almost new in the warm light, its deep red color striking against the soft fur. "It looks peaceful," she whispered. "It is," Lorenzo said. It had slow breath, and when he spoke, it was with a quiet sincerity Naomi had not heard from him before. "You brought something into this house tonight that has been missing for a long time." Naomi asked softly, "What is that?" He held her gaze, steady and gentle. "Kindness," he said, "and the reminder that even small acts can change more than you think." Naomi felt her heartbeat soften, steadying into something warm and calm. She looked down at the tiny dog once more, then at the scarf, then back at the man who had surprised her more than once tonight. The wind brushed against the windows, but inside, the warmth held steady, wrapping around them like a quiet promise neither of them knew they were making. And as the dog slept peacefully between them, Naomi understood that this night had done something rare. It had opened a door neither of them had expected to find, a door not to fear or obligation, but to something gentler, something shaped by small mercies and quiet dignity. The kind of door that once opened, did not close easily.